Welcome to the Franchise Woman podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forged. I'm Rebecca Monet. I'm CEO and Chief Scientist at Zoracle Profiles. I'm here with my co-host, community advocate, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, Tracy Kawa. Tracy, we're going to have a fun interview. We have two close friends and franchisees with Pure First. Bonnie Lanyon is a franchisee in Rancho Cucamonga, California. Bonnie successfully transitioned her business to her children after her husband's passing and continuing a proud family legacy. Carol Ann Hunter with Pure First Franchise is in Louisville, Kentucky. She and her husband Rob grew their franchise from a garage operation into one of Kentucky's leading restoration companies. So, welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Morning.
So, ladies, you each worked with your husbands. You are friends. So, take us all the way back. Where did this begin? How did you each first get into Puro First?
So you're starting with me first or Carol Ann?
Let's start with you, Bonnie.
Okay. Back in, I think it was 1991, we received a letter from Puro First asking for if you'd be interested in buying a franchise. They were going after general contractors to teach them how to be restoration companies. And so we received the letter 3 times. Business was not doing well at the time. It was during one of the many recessions, and we started checking into it. And Tom went back and was interviewed by them, and decided to buy a franchise. And they also accepted us. It took us a couple years to get the money together. Things were extremely tight at the time, and when we finally got the money pulled together, we bought the franchise. And Tom went back in 1992, 93. It was a 3-day training. He came home with a briefcase and a binder, just a few things. Anyways, and then the package was going to come later with the equipment. And that's how we started. We started in a bedroom at the house, 3 kids. And so I was balancing between trying to get a business started, learning how to do marketing, which I'd never done before in my life. And that's how we got into it. And we've been in 30, it'll be 32 years in October. That's how we got into it. Yeah.
That's an amazing story. 32 years. Your husband was a contractor before that.
Yes.
Puro First was recruiting contractors to give them another source of income, another business, a restoration business. Was it similar for you, Carol Ann? Did they hunt you down like they did Bonnie and her husband?
Pretty much. My husband was building houses, and they said they wanted to be a single source provider so that they could do the mitigation, but also build the house back to where it was before. So they contacted him. I worked at a bank. Supposedly I had a boss that was real good at analyzing contracts. So I said, let me take it to work, let him look over it. And this guy just took forever. My husband is a mover and a shaker. My boss came back and said, I don't think this is a very good contract. I don't think this is a good idea. And I said, too late. He's already signed on the dotted line. We're all in. And I was scared to death. But I said, if I ever ran into him again, I'd have to tell him, you were wrong, because Puro is the best thing that ever happened to us business-wise.
Wow. So your husband, Carol Ann, was a mover, shaker,
Oh, yeah.
risk taker. Would you describe yourself as a risk taker also?
No, I said, I am not. I take care of the money, so I'm not a risk taker as far as money concerned. But I said, but I have gone bungee jumping. But I don't like risking money, and he doesn't worry about that.
What about
then-
you?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tracy. I'm sorry.
What about you, Bonnie? Who was the risk taker between you and your husband?
Tom was definitely more of a risk taker. Yeah.
Risk taker.
People would say he would stand at the edge of a cliff and look down. I'd be back 10 feet going, yeah, it's really far down there. So yeah, he was 101st Airborne in Vietnam. And so And he was wounded 3 times when he was in Vietnam, and he was a tough cookie.
Well, thank you for his service.
Yeah.
I didn't do it, he did, but yeah, he did a lot. Yeah, it was rough on him.
I can imagine. So here we are, young couples stepping into the unknown, building this business. Tell us a little bit about the process of building that business. How did you build your team? How did you get your clients? How did you work with one another?
Me first.
Yeah, go ahead, Bonnie.
Um, well, I did the marketing, and then Tom did the work. There was times I would go out and help with the work, but we did contents. I did that. Did the office work, took care of the 3 kids, um, and just built the relationships with the agents. Back in those days when we first started, you would go out and visit the agents in your area, a couple times a month. I live in the high desert. Our main office is in Victorville. The Puro First office is in Victorville. The PuroClean's in Rancho Cucamonga. And we only had like maybe 40 agents to go visit. So we didn't have, I've heard other franchisees had hundreds to see in a month's time. I had 40. So it's a very small community in comparison to many others. So I only had 40 agents to go see twice a month when we started, and just built the relationships, and we did good work, and things grew from there. And that's how we got started.
And Carolyn, how about you in Louisville? How did you start the business and build the business?
Well, Rob already had a team of people that did construction work, but his mom sold real estate, and she was his marketer, and they made a pretty good team. So another woman in business, and she'd been a very independent businesswoman for a long time. So he did the, and at the time, uh, setting the equipment, drying out the houses, everything, but she was going around to all the agents like Bonnie did, and getting the business for us. And then we just had to, add people as the business grew, more employees, but started out with the construction crew.
So how did the business change over time, and how did your involvement in the business change over time, Carolyn?
Well, I was working at a bank, and Rob had to start traveling a lot for business. And I was having a hard time getting off from work, to travel with him. And he wanted me to travel with him. So he said, I think I've got a job for you at the office. And I'd always been good with money, and especially working at a bank. So I started that. But he is a type A personality, and I just say I'm not. And so the first few weeks of working with him, he would just bring stuff to me and say, I need this. And I would drop everything and get it for him. And after he did this several times, I said, do you need it right now? And he goes, no, I don't need it right now. So I would say, okay, thank you for, but anyway, so the first few weeks I thought, what have I gotten into working with my husband? I just don't think this is going to work at all. But now we can't imagine not working together. And it's just evolved. But he has his own space, he does his thing, I do my thing. And then when we get home at night, we just try not to talk about work and just keep it separate like that.
Yeah. And for you, Bonnie, working with your husband, how did that evolve as the years evolved?
Well, in 1974, he wanted to start a framing company. So I got a job at another company. It was a cabinet shop and a general contractor, did mostly commercial. He said, you need to learn how we do this construction thing. So I went to work in 74 for a company. And then in 1976, we started our first framing company. We ended up being one of the largest framing companies in Orange County back in the day. Then we ended up, we were going to move to Paso Robles, and that was going to be our spot to be. Loved it. And then things started happening here in the high desert. We had property for a mini storage, and we got someone to joint venture with us. And then after that, this gentleman, Noble, asked us to be his general contractor. And he built about 300 homes a year. They were little 900, 850, 900 square foot houses, little houses. And between Victorville, Palmdale, Lancaster, Little Rock, we were building 300 homes a year. And then things started changing on that. And then Noble got out of the business, and then we had a model home that we had. And it was, like I said, when the decline started happening, they closed the Air Force Base here. People were just starting to move out from Orange County after hearing it was going to be a boom, and then they closed it, and then just kind of killed all that. And then that's when we came across Puro first. And I said, you know what? We can't keep riding this roller coaster of contractors. It was up and down. We had 3 kids. So that's when we said, no, looks more stable. And so we started doing the research, and we made the decision to buy a franchise.
And a wise decision.
It was. Yes, very. And I got to meet Carol Ann.
That's exactly my next question. Like, enough about the husbands. I want to know how this beautiful friendship formed.
It took a while.
It did.
Carol Ann's not.
Why did it take a while?
Well, Carol Ann didn't. She's friendly, but if we let's go do shopping, she would go off one direction, leave you, and you're like, well, okay, that was fun. And then as time has gone on, we're really good buddies now. I mean, we just enjoy each other's company. We laugh and giggle and just have a great time together whenever we have a function with Puro systems. Yep.
We're very different. We're very different.
I understand you introduce each other to things that you never would have done in the past. Can you tell us about that?
Well, like I said, that Bonnie took me to get my first manicure and pedicure, and I was in my 40s, but yet I took her on her first zipline donkey ride, and there anyway, she says, I have never done anything like this before. I said, this is kind of our life.
Yeah, it sounds like
totally opposites.
It sounds like you complement each other really well as friends, so. Right?
Yeah, we do.
Gotta have those toes done before you go to the line, just in case.
You know who the more adventurous one out of the two of you?
We kind of get it.
She's the country girl. I grew up in Anaheim, so I'm the city girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got the city and the country.
I'm from Encinitas, so I know your area well.
Oh, do you? Okay. All right. Victorville and Anaheim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to backtrack just a little bit. I want to go deep into your relationship, but I want to talk about your husband's. When you look at this 30 years that we're working with our husbands, when you think about your husband, how would you describe him? If you had 2 or 3 or 4 adjectives, what is it that you saw in your husband's that really made him a good partner for you?
Wow. Mine was driven. I mean, he had a purpose in life, and he kind of just drug me along. Like I said, I was going to be a housewife. I was fine with being a housewife, but that never happened. I mean, I graduated in '69, and that's when things kind of started changing, where women started going to work and not just getting married right out of high school. So I was in that big change that happened in early '70s. I mean, people stopped having children for a while. We waited 8 years before we had our first one after getting married in '72. And life was just changing as far as, not just being a housewife, you're now a worker, out in the business world and being a mom. So I would have to say a lot of changes were happening at the time of when we first got married. So adjusting to that, had a mom that stayed at home all the time, and now I'm a mom working, and it was just a whole different change in life.
Yeah, I can completely relate, Bonnie. You and I are very close to the same age. I got married in '74, a couple of years after you did. And it was a dramatic change of what the role of a woman was clearly defined prior to the late 60s, early 70s. And we were on the cusp of that, you know, in this identity crisis almost. I thought this was going to be my role, and now I'm being asked to do this role. Never mind, I got to do both now. And it was a lot to handle. And you had a husband who was incredibly driven and clearly saw something in you that made a good partner, not just in the marriage, but a good partner in business. He wanted you alongside of him, and he knew there was a future working together. So he took you, and together you went through that awkwardness of the early 70s. So I get it, and I hear you. I hear you, girl. I
Okay.
hear you. Carol Ann, how would you describe your husband?
Well, I'll have to tell you that even the woman that fixed us up on our first date didn't think it would go past the first date. We were the another opposite couple, and I mean, even a good friend of mine said, "What are you doing with him?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just having fun. It's not like I'm going to marry the guy." Now,
That's
40 years later, here we are. But he, we both just, we didn't have any money at all. In fact, when he was taking me out, he was whining and dining me, and stopped during work to drop off his paycheck, you know, at the bank, just as an excuse to see me. And I thought, oh my gosh, he can't even afford, you know, all these places he's taken me. And so I said, well, I can cook every once in a while. I don't even like to cook, but I felt sorry for him because he's spending all this money on me. But anyway, he was just, he has said to me, he said, you could never be married to a lazy person. And I said, oh, you're right. I could not be married to a lazy person. And he just, we have two sons, one that will take over the business, and then one that farms. So now that my husband's transitioning the business, he works probably up to like 1 o'clock a day here. And then he goes and helps our other son farming. And so we don't eat when it's daylight savings time. Sometimes we don't eat dinner till 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
Because anyway, so he is, like I've told people, he's type A, and he gets stuff done now, and I am not type A person. But yeah, it served him well in this business. And he's the type that can start a task and he doesn't stop till he finishes it. And I tend to get a little sidetracked in my tasks. So that has served him well too. But I just had my 50-year class reunion. And so some of the teachers were there, and they had taught both of us. And he went up to him and he said, well, did you think that I would turn out the way? He said, I never dreamed that you would be a success. So even as a teenager, nobody saw him being a successful businessman. And so I love that he proved them all wrong.
Oh, Rob.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh, Rob and Tom, right?
Yeah, both of them.
Love it. Love it.
What do you think it was about you, Carol Ann, that made him say that you couldn't be married to somebody who was lazy? That you couldn't be. What was it exactly?
Because what?
What was it exactly that made him say that you couldn't be married to somebody lazy? Like, what was that character in you?
In me? Well, I was raised by a dad that was born with a physical disability, but he never wanted to be, known for that. He said, I have lived my whole life people telling me you can't do that. And he was like the first person in his family to go to college. He was a teacher. He impacted so many lives. But he said, if you don't teach a kid to work hard by the time they're 12 years old, you might as well forget it. And so his motto was can't, never, could do anything. So we were never, he said, so many people have told me my whole life I can't do something. So if he told us to do something, we couldn't say, Dad, I can't do that. He would like jump all over us. So Rob had so much respect for my dad, and he knew our work. I mean, living in the country, like, and I lived by myself, but I was just always broke, and I was always like working, helping farmers, and raise their tobacco. It was a big tobacco country. Anyway, he just knew me like, this girl could never be married to somebody lazy, because it just wasn't our work. I just wasn't raised like that.
Wow. What a great story. So, ladies, over the years, you became friends. Tell us about some of the adventures and conversations. And, did you know, Bonnie, when you met Carol Ann, she was going to be your friend? Carol Ann, when you met Bonnie, did you set out and say, I'm going to make her my friend? Tell us about the process of falling in love with each other and becoming friends. So, Bonnie, I'm going to start with you, hon.
Okay. Tom and I were more, when we went to conventions and stuff, we just kind of stayed by ourselves. We were in California, and the franchise, we didn't want help. We just did it on our own. We didn't want the friend other than, give us the base and we'll take care of it. So we didn't have they just weren't there that much for us in California. We were like the stepchild. That's what we always said. So when we went to conventions and stuff, we really didn't know anybody. We were kind of out here by ourselves. So we just kind of stayed by ourselves. Tom was a little bit more interactive with people than I were. I just kind of stayed by myself, and then, of course, Rob's and Caroline were much more friendlier than I was, and so they were hanging out with more of the in crowd, I'm going to call it, and we were just kind of over here. And so as time changed, and we started, like I said, I saw her in Nashville, and I grabbed her up and said, "Get in the car, we're going to go get a pedicure." And that's kind of where it started at. I mean, so slowly but surely we became closer and closer friends. And like I said, we only see each other a couple times a year, at convention, or if we both make it to President's Circle. I don't make it as often as they do because they're the big dogs. We're just the oldest ones in the franchise. And that's just how we gotten to become friends. And we just, when we get together, it's not really talking so much about business. We talk about the kids. We talk about the things we're doing. And so we're not like these high-powered women in business. We're moms and friends. So we let the guys do the business stuff. So, yeah.
I like that. And Carolyn, how about you? What made you say yes to getting a pedicure? Woman from Orange County, California, that seemed to be a little bit aloof.
Well, actually, I remember Bonnie, it seemed like she hung out with my mother-in-law more for a little while. But that year that I got the manicure and pedicure, she had her daughter with her. I think it was the first time I'd met Tara, her youngest daughter. And Tara had to do a paper about business, but couldn't do her own family business. So Tara actually went home with us, and we just had the best time with her. I mean, she, like, we do all these crazy things, and she just was right there with us. And then I said, we were going to dinner at a friend's house, and asked if it's okay to bring somebody. And they were actually originally from California, knew the area that Bonnie and Tom and Tara lived in. And anyway, it was just, I said, it's such a small world when you get down to it, and I just felt like Tara was part of our family. That, she was just with us for a week, I think, but it was, anyway, and that just kind of tied all of our family together.
So nice. Sounds like there were so many synchronicities going on between.
Yes.
Sure, for sure. So this relationship built, one of the things that we love about franchising is the relationships that come out of being in the same business, but in a different area, right? You're in Rancho Cucamonga, and you're also in the desert, and then Carol Ann. So these relationships, how have they benefited you over the years? Carolyn, you actually shared a story kind of offline a little bit about how a relationship really helped you execute on a very big contract. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, we were at the President's Circle, which was all these different franchises, and the man that was he was sponsoring the trip actually owns a business, IDS, and I'd met him, but I hadn't really talked to him that much. But Rob and I talked to his wife for a long time, and just a real personable guy. And I consider him a mover and a shaker. You could tell he didn't, letting grass grow under his feet. But right after we got back from that trip, we started, like, with the floods and everything, we started getting in all these calls, and somebody called Rob and said, I've got a commercial job. They flooded, and it was ended up, it's going to be a $3.5 million job, which is probably the biggest job we've ever had. He knew we've got all kinds of equipment from being in business for so many years, but we didn't have the big equipment we needed. He said, do you remember this guy's name? I remembered his name. He contacted him. He said, I can be there tomorrow. And so without, seeing him at that meeting with all the other, I said, that was just huge for us to know somebody that could be here for us, dropped everything, came, and because if it hadn't happened, we might have lost the job, who knows? So, you can't even think that way, but I was just so thankful that he was able, that we had that contact, and, it just all came together.
Wow. What a blessing. What a blessing that was in these relationships that you built. Bonnie, you recently transitioned the business after Tom's passing to your children. Is it fun to watch your kids now stepping into his big shoes that he left behind? Tell us a little bit about that process.
They both have been in the business for years. Tara started working for us when she was 14.
Oh,
After school, she would come in, and and this is, we had one computer back then. We weren't even on the internet, because internet nobody used. We had one computer, and she kind of organized things and did stuff. She would never get on the phone. She was too shy to get on the phone. So she just kind of, organized some things in the office. And then as time has gone on, she went to college and worked, in between classes, and, on the days that she wasn't going to school. And she just grew the computer side of it. She's very techno, and she took us from one computer in the office to, within not too long of a time, 10, and that's when things started going more on the internet. And we started off, 37 years ago. It was so different than it is today. There was no program work. Everything was done through marketing. And Tara took care of the office, along with me, and she grew, and now she runs, she's more like a Tom. She implements and does things. Jared's more like me, where he's like the thinker and like, hey, let's do this. So the roles have kind of changed. Like I said, Tara's more like Tom, but she does the office part of it. And Jared's out in the field running the jobs and organizing things and changing things as far as each one of the different departments. So that's what he's working on. Then plus we have the two other offices now that he's, trying to get everybody on the same line, like doing it McDonald's way. So there's no thinking about it. This is the way it's done. Boom, 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 boom. And there's no thinking. So anyways, that the kids have, Tom and I always said, we took it from the beginning, from, scratching and screaming to get things going, to, the level that it was at when Tom passed. And it's like, now it's time for you guys to take it to the next level. And so that's what they're doing. So it's just fun to watch them. It is fun watching them interact with each other. And they argue like Tom and I did too.
I think this is something we don't talk enough about in franchising, that husband and wife teams can build incredible businesses and build lifelong relationships with other couples that are in the business, to have the support of one another and to appreciate what each party brings to the table, right? That you brought something to the table, your husband's brought something to the table, and you built this generational wealth, this ability to pass on something that's solid for your children. For my last question, unless Tracy has one, but what advice would you give to a woman whose husband says, I got this idea, or I was looking at this. What advice would you give to a woman today?
Trust their judgment, work with them, be their, their, I don't want to say backbone, but their partner.
Your part.
Yeah, their partner. Be separate but be one, and so that's kind of where we're together on it. It's like go for it, and so be a team.
See yourself as a team. Be their helpmate. Be their partner. How about you, Carolyn? What advice would you give a woman whose husband has this wild hair idea of buying a business?
I think a lot of trust goes there. You have to be very trusting. You have to be, I think, very secure in your relationship, and even realize there's a possibility that it could fail, and just be strong enough to accept the consequences of going out on that limb. I mean, it's just sometimes it's just a leap of faith.
It is. Any questions from you, Tracy?
I love the story. I love the similarities and the differences in each of the relationships and the way they built their businesses, the way they supported their husbands. That's what's striking to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet complementary, right? Just
Yes,
so
very.
complementary. And then this lifelong relationship, this friendship that you're going to have, even beyond the business, right? You're not talking about the business when you're talking to one another. You're talking about other things that are equally as important, maybe even more important to you, your children, etc., and what you're up to. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful situation. Ladies, I want to thank you for joining us today and addressing something that we haven't really addressed before to this depth, which is the partnership component of growing a business and these long-term relationships that come out of it. And when I look at the two of you, Bonnie, I'm looking at you, and my first impression is you used the word backbone. I would have used the word steely, that you were steely, you were strong, you were in many ways the person he leaned on when there was doubt or when he's taking a risk. There's a steeliness with you, like steel magnolias when I'm talking about steely, right? So there's this strength that you have and this focus that you have that I'm sure blessed him, even when he was feeling maybe a little bit unsteady, he had you right there as his strength. And Carol Ann, I mean, I want to go ziplining with you.
Not in Mexico, it's not safe.
Not before we get our toes done, though, in our hands.
Right.
All right.
So thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you sharing your hearts and your opinions on things.
Thank you.
And Tracy, I'm going to let you do the wrap.
It struck me, Rebecca, with everything that you just mentioned in your last comment, and then earlier, Bonnie saying something about team. I think a lot of times when husbands and wives work together, and this was my experience when I was very young, things can become competitive. And I think there's a certain humility and humbleness that you have to have. And I think that both Bonnie and Carol Ann, they have that. They have that humility. Like I don't need the spotlight. You lead us, but I'm going to be a really strong wind beneath your wing.
Yes.
And that's my takeaway. Like I just got the chills on that.
I get the chills too on that one.
That's my takeaway. And I love that. I appreciate that about both of you. And I also think that that's the mutual connection that you both have, that you're like magnets to each other in the friendship. Because even though there are differences where one might be nails and a little, city girl, the other one's country girl, you both have that tenacity, humility, and you probably recognize that in each other. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you, Tracy. That was well put. And again, thank you, ladies, for being with us. And to those listening in today, make sure to comment, make sure to like, make sure to share Bonnie and Carol Ann's interview. And of course, we'll see you next week on another episode of the Franchise Woman Podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forged.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.